Morning sun blazed over Camp Pendleton as another group of recruits prepared for weapons training. Among them stood a young woman who would soon prove that courage doesn't come with a uniform, and that the deadliest weapon on any range isn't always held by those who look the part. What happened next would shake the foundation of military tradition and force an entire unit to confront their deepest prejudices. In a world where respect is earned one bullet at a time, Sarah Martinez was about to fire the shot heard around the Corps. This is her story, raw, unfiltered, and absolutely true. Sarah Martinez had always been different from other girls in her small Texas town. While her classmates spent weekends at the mall or gossiping about boys, she was out in the countryside with her grandfather, learning to hunt and shoot. Her grandfather, Roberto, was a Vietnam veteran who believed that every person should know how to protect themselves and their family. He taught Sarah everything he knew about firearms, patience, and respect for the weapon. Growing up in a military family, Sarah heard stories about honor, duty, and service from the time she could walk. Her father had served in the Gulf War, and her older brother was currently stationed overseas. The military was in her blood, but she knew that being a woman in the Marines would bring challenges that her male relatives never faced. When Sarah announced her decision to join the Marines at 18, reactions were mixed. Her grandfather smiled with pride, remembering her steady hands and keen eye. Her father worried about the physical and emotional toll military life would take on his daughter. Her mother cried, not from disappointment, but from fear of losing another family member to the demands of service. The recruitment process was intense. Sarah had to prove herself physically, mentally, and emotionally before she could even begin basic training. She spent months preparing her body for the rigorous demands ahead. Every morning, she ran 5 miles before school. Every evening, she did push-ups and sit-ups until her muscles burned. She studied military history, memorized ranks and protocols, and practiced following orders with precision. Boot camp at Paris Island was everything Sarah had expected and worse. The drill instructors showed no mercy to anyone, but she noticed they seemed to push the female recruits harder, as if trying to break them down and force them to quit. Sarah refused to give them that satisfaction. When other recruits complained about the heat, the exhaustion, or the constant pressure, Sarah kept her mouth shut and her eyes focused on the goal. The physical training was brutal, but Sarah's years of preparation paid off. She could run as fast as most of the men in her unit, carry her full pack without falling behind, and complete obstacle courses that left others gasping for breath. What surprised her was how much the mental training challenged her. Learning to follow orders without question, to work as part of a team, and to trust her life to the person beside her required a different kind of strength. Throughout boot camp, Sarah encountered varying degrees of acceptance from her fellow recruits. Some respected her determination and skill. Others resented her presence, believing that women had no place in combat roles. A few tried to sabotage her efforts, hoping to prove their point about female weakness. Sarah learned to sleep lightly, check her equipment twice, and never turn her back on someone whose loyalty was questionable. The weapons training portion of boot camp was where Sarah truly began to shine. While other recruits struggled to hit targets at basic distances, Sarah consistently placed shots in tight groupings. Her childhood training with her grandfather had given her an intuitive understanding of breathing, trigger control, and sight alignment that couldn't be taught in a few weeks of military instruction. Despite her obvious skill, some drill instructors seemed determined to find fault with her performance. They criticized her stance, questioned her focus, and demanded that she repeat exercises that she had already completed perfectly. Sarah realized that she wasn't just fighting to become a Marine. She was fighting to prove that women deserve the same respect and opportunities as their male counterparts. The graduation ceremony from boot camp was one of the proudest moments of Sarah's life. Her family traveled from Texas to watch her receive her Eagle, Globe, and Anchor. Her grandfather's eyes filled with tears as he watched his granddaughter stand at attention in dress blues. Her parents beamed with pride, despite their earlier concerns about her chosen path. After graduation, Sarah received orders to report to Camp Pendleton for advanced combat training. This would be different from boot camp, where male and female recruits were kept largely separate. At Pendleton, she would be training alongside men who had never worked closely with women Marines before. She knew that this would be her real test. The bus ride to California gave Sarah time to reflect on her journey so far. She thought about the doubters who had told her she wasn't strong enough, fast enough, or tough enough to succeed. She thought about her grandfather's lessons about patience and precision. Most importantly, she thought about the oath she had taken to protect and defend her country, regardless of what others thought about her gender. Camp Pendleton sprawled across miles of California coastline, a massive training facility where Marines prepared for real-world combat situations. The base buzzed with activity as thousands of Marines honed their skills in everything from hand-to-hand combat to advanced weapons systems. Sarah reported to her assigned unit with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. Her new platoon consisted of 24 Marines, and she was the only woman. The platoon sergeant, Staff Sergeant Johnson, was a career Marine with 3 combat deployments under his belt. He looked at Sarah with skeptical eyes during her introduction, making it clear that he had reservations about female Marines in combat roles. The other Marines in the unit ranged from recently graduated boot camp rookies to seasoned corporals preparing for their next deployment. The first few days at Pendleton involved settling into the barracks, meeting her new teammates, and beginning the intensive training schedule. Sarah quickly learned that the dynamics here were different from boot camp. The men in her unit had their own established friendships and hierarchies. She would need to prove herself all over again, but this time the stakes felt higher. During physical training sessions, Sarah noticed that some of her fellow Marines would deliberately try to outpace her during runs or lift heavier weights than necessary during strength training. They weren't necessarily trying to hurt her, but they wanted to establish their superiority. Sarah responded by pushing herself harder, refusing to let anyone question her physical capabilities. The academic portions of training covered advanced tactics, weapons systems, and combat scenarios. Sarah excelled in classroom settings, asking insightful questions and demonstrating a thorough understanding of complex military concepts. However, she noticed that her contributions were often dismissed or overlooked during group discussions. When she suggested tactical improvements or identified potential problems with proposed strategies, the room would fall silent until a male Marine repeated her idea and received credit for the insight. As the days passed, Sarah realized that earning respect in this environment would require more than just meeting the same standards as her male counterparts. She would need to exceed those standards consistently and demonstrate skills that couldn't be ignored or dismissed. She began spending extra time studying weapon manuals, practicing field exercises, and researching military history. The upcoming weapons qualification would be her first major test at Pendleton. Unlike the basic marksmanship training from boot camp, this qualification would involve multiple weapon systems, moving targets, and combat scenarios designed to simulate real battlefield conditions. Sarah knew that her performance on the range would largely determine how her unit viewed her capabilities going forward. She spent her free time at the base library, reading about advanced shooting techniques and studying the technical specifications of every weapon system they would be using. She practiced dry firing exercises in her room, working on muscle memory and trigger control. She even sought out Marines from other units who were willing to share tips and advice about the upcoming qualifications. The night before weapons training was scheduled to begin, Sarah lay in her bunk listening to the conversations of her fellow Marines. Some expressed confidence about the upcoming tests, sharing stories of their previous shooting experiences. Others admitted to feeling nervous about the standards they would need to meet. Sarah remained quiet, but inside she felt a familiar calm settling over her, the same feeling she had experienced as a child when her grandfather would take her hunting. As she drifted off to sleep, Sarah thought about the journey that had brought her to this point. From a small town in Texas to one of the most prestigious military training facilities in the world, she had overcome obstacles and exceeded expectations at every step. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but she felt ready to face whatever came next. The alarm sounded at 0500 hours, marking the beginning of what would become the most important day of Sarah's military career. She dressed quickly in her combat utilities, checked her gear twice, and joined her unit for morning formation. The platoon sergeant announced that they would be heading to the rifle range for the beginning of their weapons qualification training. As the unit marched toward the range, Sarah felt the familiar weight of expectations on her shoulders. She knew that every shot she fired would be scrutinized, every mistake would be magnified, and every success would be questioned. But she also knew that she had the skills and determination to prove herself worthy of wearing the Marine uniform. The sun was just beginning to rise over the California hills as Sarah Martinez prepared to take aim at more than just paper targets. She was about to take aim at decades of military tradition and prove that courage, skill, and determination weren't defined by gender. The rifle range at Camp Pendleton stretched out like a small city, with multiple firing positions, equipment storage buildings, and training areas designed to simulate various combat environments. Sarah had seen ranges before during boot camp, but this facility was on an entirely different level. Advanced electronic targets, movable barriers, and sophisticated scoring systems created an atmosphere that felt more like preparation for actual combat than simple marksmanship training. Range Master Gunnery Sergeant Williams called the platoon to attention as they approached the firing line. Williams was a legend at Pendleton, known for his exceptional marksmanship skills and his ability to transform average shooters into expert marksmen. He had served in multiple combat zones and earned numerous shooting awards throughout his career. His reputation preceded him, and every Marine knew that training under Williams was both an honor and an intense challenge. The initial briefing covered range safety procedures, weapon handling protocols, and the standards they would need to meet for qualification. Williams explained that they would be working with multiple weapon systems over the next several weeks, starting with the M16A4 service rifle and progressing to more advanced systems. Each Marine would need to demonstrate proficiency at various distances, shooting positions, and conditions to earn their qualification badges. As Williams outlined the requirements, Sarah noticed several of her fellow Marines glancing in her direction. Some looked curious about how she would perform. Others appeared skeptical, as if they were already expecting her to fail. A few seemed openly hostile, muttering comments under their breath about women having no business on a combat range. Sarah kept her expression neutral, but internally she felt her resolve strengthening. The first exercise involved basic rifle familiarization. Each Marine was issued an M16A4 rifle and given time to inspect the weapon, check its condition, and practice basic handling procedures. Sarah performed her inspection with the methodical precision her grandfather had taught her years earlier. She checked the barrel for obstructions, tested the action for smooth operation, and ensured that all safety mechanisms were functioning properly. Corporal Davies, one of the more vocal critics of women in combat roles, positioned himself next to Sarah during the familiarization exercise. Davies had served one deployment in Afghanistan and considered himself an expert on military matters. He watched Sarah's weapon handling with obvious skepticism, looking for any mistake he could point out to the instructors. When Sarah completed her rifle inspection flawlessly, Davies made a comment about how handling a weapon in a controlled environment was different from using it in actual combat. Sarah didn't respond verbally, but she filed away his attitude for future reference. She had learned during boot camp that responding to every provocation would only create more problems. Instead, she focused on letting her performance speak for itself. The first live fire exercise took place at the 100-yard line, with Marines shooting from supported prone positions at stationary targets. This was considered the easiest shooting scenario, designed to help everyone get comfortable with their weapons before moving to more challenging drills. Range safety officers positioned themselves behind each firing position to monitor weapon handling and ensure compliance with safety protocols. When the order to commence firing was given, the range erupted with the controlled chaos of coordinated gunfire. Sarah settled into her shooting position, applied the breathing techniques her grandfather had taught her, and began engaging her target. Her first shot struck the center ring, followed by 4 more shots in a tight grouping that impressed even the range officers. Corporal Davies fired from the position next to Sarah, and his shots were scattered across the target face with several missing the scoring rings entirely. He muttered curses under his breath and adjusted his position repeatedly, but his subsequent shots showed little improvement. Other Marines in the platoon were experiencing similar difficulties, with many struggling to achieve even minimal qualifying scores. Gunnery Sergeant Williams walked behind the firing line, observing each Marine's performance and offering brief corrections when needed. When he reached Sarah's position, he paused to study her target through binoculars. Her grouping was the tightest he had seen from the platoon, with all shots clustered in the high-scoring center rings. Williams made a note on his clipboard, but offered no comment. As the exercise continued, word began to spread along the firing line about Sarah's exceptional shooting. Marines who had been dismissive of her abilities started paying closer attention to her technique. Range officers began pointing out her position and breathing control as examples for other shooters to follow. Sarah remained focused on her own performance, but she couldn't help noticing the shift in attention. The second exercise moved the Marines back to the 200-yard line, where they would shoot from unsupported sitting positions. This required greater skill and stability, as shooters had to maintain accurate aim without the benefit of ground support for their rifles. Many Marines found this transition challenging, as the increased distance and less stable shooting position magnified any flaws in their technique. Sarah had practiced this exact scenario countless times with her grandfather on their family's ranch. She settled into the sitting position with confidence, using her legs and torso to create a stable platform for her rifle. Her breathing was controlled and rhythmic as she engaged each target with deliberate precision. Once again, her shots grouped tightly in the center rings, earning impressed nods from the range staff. Corporal Davies was struggling even more at the increased distance. His shots were inconsistent, with several missing the target entirely. Frustration was evident in his body language as he repeatedly adjusted his position and grip. When a range officer suggested he observe Sarah's technique, Davies responded with a dismissive comment about luck versus skill. The final exercise of the day challenged the Marines to shoot from standing positions at 300 yards. This was considered an advanced test of marksmanship skill, requiring excellent body control, breathing technique, and trigger discipline. Many experienced Marines found this distance and position combination difficult, and several rookies were unable to achieve any qualifying hits. Sarah approached the 300-yard line with the same methodical preparation she had used for the earlier exercises. She studied the wind conditions, checked her rifle's zero, and visualized her shooting sequence. When the firing command was given, she engaged her target with the same steady rhythm that had characterized her shooting all day. Her shots continued to find the center rings with remarkable consistency. By the end of the first day of range training, Sarah had posted the highest qualifying scores in her platoon. Her consistency across all distances and shooting positions had impressed the range staff and surprised many of her fellow Marines. However, she also noticed an increase in hostile attitudes from some unit members who seemed threatened by her superior performance. During the equipment cleaning session that followed the range training, conversations buzzed with discussion about the day's shooting results. Some Marines openly praised Sarah's skill and asked for advice about improving their own techniques. Others muttered complaints about the standards being too easy or suggested that her performance was somehow unfair or artificial. Corporal Davies was particularly vocal in his criticism, suggesting that range shooting bore no resemblance to real combat conditions. He claimed that Sarah's performance was meaningless because she had never faced the stress and chaos of actual battle. Several other Marines nodded in agreement, despite the fact that most of them had also never seen combat. Sarah listened to these comments without responding directly, but she began to understand that her shooting ability was being viewed as a threat to the established hierarchy within her unit. Some Marines who had built their reputations on supposed shooting prowess were now being outperformed by the woman they had dismissed as incapable. This created tension that went beyond simple competition. That evening, Sarah wrote a letter to her grandfather describing her first day on the range. She told him about the familiar feeling of peace that came with controlled breathing and precise trigger pulls. She also shared her concerns about the growing hostility from some of her fellow Marines and asked for his advice about handling the political aspects of military life. Staff Sergeant Johnson called Sarah into his office after evening chow to discuss her performance. Johnson had been watching the dynamics within his platoon carefully, and he recognized that Sarah's exceptional shooting was creating both positive and negative reactions among his Marines. He wanted to address the situation before it escalated into serious problems. Johnson acknowledged Sarah's impressive marksmanship skills while also warning her about the challenges of being an outstanding performer in a male-dominated environment. He explained that some Marines might view her success as a personal attack on their own competence and masculinity. He advised her to remain professional, but cautious about how she interacted with potentially hostile unit members. The conversation with Johnson helped Sarah understand that her technical proficiency was only part of the challenge she faced. She would need to navigate complex social and political dynamics while maintaining her commitment to excellence. Johnson assured her that he would support her continued training and development, but he also made it clear that she would need to prove herself repeatedly in various situations. As Sarah prepared for bed that night, she reflected on the day's events and the conversations that had followed. She felt proud of her shooting performance, but she also recognized that her journey was just beginning. The range training would become progressively more challenging, and the attitudes of some unit members seemed to be hardening against her rather than softening. She thought about her grandfather's teachings about patience and persistence in the face of adversity. He had often told her that the most important battles were won not through single dramatic moments, but through consistent performance over time. Sarah resolved to continue demonstrating her capabilities while remaining alert to the growing tension around her. The second day of range training would introduce more complex scenarios, including timed firing exercises and stress-inducing conditions designed to simulate combat pressure. Sarah knew that maintaining her performance standards under these conditions would be crucial for establishing her credibility as a combat-ready Marine. She also suspected that some of her critics would be hoping for her to fail when the pressure increased. As she drifted off to sleep, Sarah could hear conversations continuing in the barracks around her. Some Marines were discussing techniques they had learned by watching her shoot. Others were complaining about the unfairness of competing against someone with her obvious advantages. A few were making plans to test her abilities in ways that went beyond the official training curriculum. Sarah realized that her exceptional first day on the range had elevated her profile within the unit, but it had also painted a target on her back. Some Marines now saw her as a symbol of changing military standards that they opposed. Others viewed her success as a challenge to their own status and reputation. She would need to be prepared for both official tests and unofficial challenges in the days ahead. The morning alarm would sound in just a few hours, marking the beginning of another day of training and another opportunity to prove herself worthy of the Marine uniform. Sarah Martinez was discovering that being the best shooter in her unit came with responsibilities and risks that extended far beyond hitting paper targets. She was about to learn that some of the most dangerous threats on a military base didn't always come from the official enemy. The second week of range training introduced advanced combat scenarios that pushed every Marine to their limits. The exercises now included moving targets, multiple engagement sequences, and time pressure designed to simulate the chaos of actual combat situations. Sarah continued to excel in these more demanding conditions, but her success was creating increasingly hostile reactions from several unit members. Corporal Davies had recruited 2 other Marines, Lance Corporals Peterson and Miller, to join his informal campaign against Sarah's presence in their unit. These 3 had formed a tight group based on their shared belief that women had no place in combat roles, and Sarah's obvious competence threatened their worldview. They began developing strategies to undermine her confidence and create situations where she might fail publicly. The psychological pressure tactics started subtly. Davies and his allies would make loud comments about the differences between range shooting and combat effectiveness whenever Sarah was within earshot. They questioned whether her marksmanship skills would hold up under real stress, suggesting that her calm demeanor on the range was actually a sign of inexperience rather than competence. During equipment maintenance sessions, the 3 Marines would deliberately exclude Sarah from group conversations and planning discussions. When she attempted to contribute ideas or ask questions, they would respond with condescending explanations or dismissive comments. Their goal was to isolate her socially while making her feel incompetent in areas beyond marksmanship. Sarah recognized these tactics from her experiences in civilian life, where she had encountered similar attempts to undermine confident women. She had learned to respond with professional competence rather than emotional reactions, knowing that losing her temper would only provide ammunition for her critics. However, the constant low-level harassment was mentally exhausting and required significant emotional energy to manage. The situation escalated during a field exercise that combined marksmanship with tactical movement. Marines were required to advance through a course while engaging targets at various distances and positions. The exercise tested not only shooting skills, but also physical conditioning, tactical awareness, and the ability to perform under pressure. Sarah approached this challenge with the same methodical preparation that had characterized her previous training. As the exercise began, Sarah moved through the course with fluid efficiency, engaging targets accurately while maintaining good tactical positioning. Her childhood experience hunting in varied terrain had taught her how to move quietly and efficiently through natural obstacles. She completed the course with one of the fastest times while achieving perfect target scores. Davies and his allies completed the same course with significantly slower times and lower accuracy scores. Rather than acknowledging Sarah's superior performance, they began spreading rumors that she had received advance information about the course layout or that the targets had been adjusted to make her shooting easier. These accusations were baseless, but they created doubt among other unit members who might otherwise have been supportive. Gunnery Sergeant Williams called Davies into his office after hearing about the rumors being spread around the unit. Williams had observed Sarah's training closely and knew that her performance was the result of genuine skill rather than any form of assistance. He warned Davies about the consequences of spreading false accusations against fellow Marines and made it clear that such behavior would not be tolerated. The official reprimand only increased Davies' hostility towards Sarah, as he now blamed her for getting him in trouble with the range staff. He began looking for opportunities to create situations where Sarah might be forced into genuine failure or embarrassment. His plans became more sophisticated and potentially dangerous as his frustration grew. The third week of training introduced night firing exercises, where Marines had to engage targets in low-light conditions using various optical devices and techniques. Night shooting required different skills from daytime marksmanship, including the ability to adapt to changing light conditions and the use of specialized equipment. Many Marines found these exercises particularly challenging. Sarah had limited experience with night shooting, but she approached the training with her usual dedication to preparation and practice. She studied the technical manuals for all optical devices, practiced with the equipment during off-duty hours, and sought advice from experienced Marines who were willing to share their knowledge. Her systematic approach to learning new skills impressed several unit members who began to respect her work ethic. The first night firing exercise took place in nearly complete darkness, with Marines using night vision scopes to engage targets at various distances. The exercise tested their ability to acquire targets quickly, maintain steady shooting positions in uncomfortable conditions, and adapt their techniques to the limitations of the equipment. Sarah performed well, though not with the same dominant excellence she had shown in daytime shooting. Davies saw Sarah's slightly reduced performance during night shooting as an opportunity to challenge her competence publicly. He began making comments about how her previous success had been due to ideal conditions rather than genuine skill. He suggested that real combat would expose her limitations and put other Marines at risk if they had to depend on her abilities. The psychological warfare intensified when Davies and his allies began sabotaging Sarah's equipment in subtle ways that would affect her performance without being obviously malicious. They would slightly loosen scope mounts, introduce dirt into rifle actions, or misalign sighting systems in ways that would degrade accuracy while appearing to be normal equipment issues. Sarah noticed the equipment problems, but initially attributed them to the harsh training environment and normal wear on military gear. She began spending extra time maintaining her equipment and checking all systems before each training session. However, the frequency and nature of the problems eventually made her suspect deliberate interference. The situation reached a critical point during a competitive shooting exercise designed to identify the top marksman in the unit. Marines would compete head-to-head in various shooting scenarios, with winners advancing to represent the unit in base-wide competitions. Sarah was expected to perform well in this competition based on her previous training results. Before the competition began, Davies and Peterson approached Sarah with false concern about a supposed problem with her rifle. They claimed to have noticed an issue with her scope mounting that could affect her safety and suggested that she allow them to make a quick adjustment. Sarah was suspicious of their sudden helpfulness, but didn't want to appear paranoid or uncooperative. The adjustment that Davies made to Sarah's scope was subtle but devastating to accuracy. He deliberately introduced a significant zero error that would cause all of her shots to miss their intended targets by several inches. In a precision shooting competition, this sabotage would virtually guarantee her failure and public embarrassment. Sarah began the competition with confidence, but her first few shots hit well outside the scoring rings despite her perfect technique. She quickly realized that something was wrong with her equipment and requested permission to check her rifle. However, the competition rules required Marines to complete their initial sequence before making any adjustments. As Sarah continued shooting with the compromised equipment, her scores plummeted from her usual exceptional levels to barely qualifying standards. Davies and his allies watched with obvious satisfaction as other Marines began questioning her abilities and wondering if her previous performances had been flukes or the result of favorable conditions. The range officers were puzzled by Sarah's sudden decline in performance, as her technique appeared flawless despite the poor results. Gunnery Sergeant Williams allowed her to examine her equipment after completing the required sequences. Sarah quickly identified the scope problem and realized that it had been deliberately induced rather than occurring naturally. Williams was furious when Sarah reported the suspected sabotage. He had observed the interaction between Sarah and Davies before the competition and began to piece together what had happened. However, proving deliberate sabotage would be difficult without witnesses to the actual tampering, and Davies would likely deny any wrongdoing. The investigation into the equipment sabotage created significant tension within the unit. Williams questioned several Marines about their knowledge of the incident, but no one was willing to provide information that would directly implicate Davies. The code of silence among Marines made it difficult to obtain evidence, even when wrongdoing was suspected. Sarah faced a difficult decision about how to respond to the sabotage. She could pursue official charges against Davies, but doing so would likely escalate the conflict and potentially divide the entire unit. Alternatively, she could accept the situation and focus on preventing future incidents while demonstrating her abilities through continued excellent performance. Staff Sergeant Johnson counseled Sarah about the political realities of military life and the importance of choosing her battles carefully. He acknowledged that she had likely been the victim of deliberate sabotage, but warned that pursuing formal charges could backfire and damage her reputation within the Marine Corps. Johnson suggested that the best response would be superior performance that made any further sabotage attempts irrelevant. The incident marked a turning point in Sarah's relationship with her unit. Some Marines who had previously been neutral or mildly supportive now viewed her as a troublemaker who caused problems within the team. Others began to respect her for maintaining professionalism despite obvious mistreatment. The unit was becoming polarized around the issue of Sarah's presence and capabilities. Sarah decided to focus on her training and performance while remaining vigilant about potential threats to her equipment and safety. She began implementing security measures for her gear and developing contingency plans for various scenarios. Her grandfather had taught her that persistence and preparation were the best responses to adversity, and she was determined to prove his lessons correct. The next phase of training would involve advanced combat scenarios with live ammunition and realistic stress conditions. Sarah knew that these exercises would provide opportunities for both triumph and disaster, depending on how well she had prepared for the challenges ahead. She also suspected that Davies and his allies would escalate their efforts to discredit her as the stakes increased. As she prepared for sleep that night, Sarah reflected on the lessons she had learned about the difference between technical competence and organizational politics. Her marksmanship skills were exceptional, but succeeding as a Marine would require navigating complex human relationships and institutional barriers that had nothing to do with her ability to hit targets. The journey from small-town Texas to Camp Pendleton had taught her about her own capabilities and limitations. Now she was learning about the broader challenges facing women in traditionally male environments. The range training was preparing her for combat, but the social dynamics of her unit were teaching her about a different kind of warfare entirely. Sarah Martinez was discovering that some battles couldn't be won with accurate shooting alone. She would need courage, wisdom, and determination to overcome the obstacles being placed in her path by people who should have been her allies and teammates. The real test of her character was just beginning, and the outcome would affect not only her own future, but the opportunities available to other women who might follow in her footsteps. The fourth week of training brought the most challenging exercises yet, combining live fire drills with simulated combat stress and physical exhaustion. The scenarios were designed to test Marines under conditions that closely replicated the chaos and pressure of actual battlefield situations. For Sarah, these exercises represented both an opportunity to prove her capabilities and a potential venue for her opponents to escalate their sabotage efforts. Davies had become increasingly frustrated with his inability to discredit Sarah through subtle means. Her continued excellent performance, despite the equipment sabotage and psychological harassment, had actually enhanced her reputation among several unit members who admired her resilience. Some Marines were beginning to openly question Davies' hostility toward their female colleague, creating divisions within his small group of supporters. The training scenario for Monday morning involved a simulated patrol under fire, where Marines had to advance through enemy territory while engaging multiple targets and responding to surprise attacks. The exercise required rapid decision-making, accurate shooting under pressure, and effective teamwork with other unit members. Sarah approached this challenge with careful preparation, studying maps of the training area and reviewing tactical procedures. As the exercise began, Sarah's team moved through the course with coordinated precision. She engaged targets accurately while maintaining awareness of her teammates' positions and the overall tactical situation. Her ability to remain calm under simulated fire impressed the range officers and demonstrated skills that went beyond simple marksmanship. She was developing into a complete combat Marine. Davies watched Sarah's performance with growing resentment. His own team struggled with coordination and accuracy during the same exercise, highlighting the contrast between his leadership abilities and Sarah's natural competence. After the exercise concluded, he began planning a more direct confrontation that would force a crisis and potentially end Sarah's military career. The opportunity Davies had been waiting for came during a special night exercise designed to test Marines under maximum stress conditions. The scenario involved a simulated base defense situation where small teams had to repel coordinated attacks from multiple directions. Live ammunition would be used, but with strict safety protocols and careful supervision from range officers. Davies volunteered to serve as Sarah's spotter and backup during the exercise, claiming that he wanted to work more closely with all unit members to improve team cohesion. Sarah was suspicious of his sudden cooperation, but couldn't refuse without appearing uncooperative herself. Staff Sergeant Johnson approved the pairing, hoping that working together might resolve some of the tension between the two Marines. The night exercise began with Sarah and Davies positioned in a defensive fighting position overlooking a valley where simulated enemy forces would advance. Sarah's role was primary shooter, while Davies was supposed to provide target identification, ammunition supply, and backup fire if needed. The scenario required close cooperation and trust between the two Marines. As the exercise progressed, Sarah engaged multiple targets with her usual accuracy and efficiency. Davies performed his supporting role adequately, though he seemed more focused on observing Sarah's technique than on scanning for additional threats. The range officers monitoring their position noted effective teamwork and successful target engagement. The crisis began during a lull in the exercise when Sarah's rifle experienced a sudden and dangerous malfunction. The weapon failed to extract a fired cartridge case, creating a potentially explosive situation if not handled properly. Sarah immediately applied proper malfunction clearance procedures, but the problem persisted and required detailed inspection to resolve safely. Davies saw the malfunction as the opportunity he had been seeking. Instead of providing assistance or calling for range officer support, he began pressuring Sarah to continue firing despite the obvious equipment problem. He claimed that enemy forces were advancing and that her hesitation was putting the entire team at risk. His goal was to force her into a dangerous situation that could result in injury or equipment damage. Sarah recognized the danger of continuing to fire with a malfunctioning weapon, despite Davy's pressure to resume shooting. She knew that proper safety procedures required stopping all fire and clearing the malfunction before continuing the exercise. However, Davies became increasingly aggressive in his demands, claiming that her caution proved she lacked the courage needed for real combat situations. The confrontation escalated when Davies grabbed Sarah's rifle and attempted to force the malfunction through improper procedures. His actions violated multiple safety protocols and created a genuinely dangerous situation with a loaded weapon. Sarah struggled to regain control of her rifle while preventing Davies from causing an accident that could injure both of them. Range Officer Sergeant Martinez heard the commotion and quickly moved to investigate the situation. He found Davies and Sarah struggling over the malfunctioning rifle in clear violation of range safety procedures. Martinez immediately took control of the weapon and called for the exercise to be suspended while he investigated what had happened. The investigation revealed that Davies had deliberately sabotaged Sarah's rifle before the exercise by introducing foreign material into the chamber area. The malfunction was not a random equipment failure, but a calculated attempt to create a dangerous situation that would discredit Sarah's competence and potentially cause her physical harm. The evidence was clear and undeniable. Gunnery Sergeant Williams was called to the scene and quickly assessed the situation. The evidence of deliberate sabotage, combined with Davies' attempt to force unsafe procedures,